Hello there, and welcome to another episode of Live with Littledata. I'm joined today by Tom Cox from Swanky. Welcome, Tom.
Hello, nice to join you, Ed.
So we wanted to take a break from some of the recent conversation about Klaviyo and talk a bit about Google consent mode. This might be a topic that's a bit old for some of you out there. Google have been going on about it for a few years now, but I think what's brought it to the fore this month is that they formally announced that you need to do something about it and take action if you wanted to continue using Google Ads in Europe. So let's start with kind of what, Tom, is Google consent mode?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think there's been a lot of confusion. So this is something that Google announced the end of last year and came into effect on the 6th of March. And really, this is it's kind of an update to their consent framework. And it changes the behavior of tags that are sent to GA4 and to Google Ads. And the rationale behind it is they want to really improve, I guess, their kind of compliance with GDPR rules, making sure that if a user doesn't want maybe their ads data shared, that both GA4 and Google Ads have those signals.
Yeah, so formally it's V2 of their consent mode. The V1's been around for a couple of years, but as you say, V2 was announced end of last year, and I guess it's just a simple, kind of general way of sharing that or respecting that consent from within Google's tagging. So making sure that people who've said I don't want to be marketed to are not getting the Google tags. And I think it's Google, I guess, a bit more complicated in Google's case because they have this one library G tag that's actually used for analytics, for Google Analytics, but also in the same way for retargeting on Google Ads. So I guess they have to be super clear about which of those things you've opted into or not.
Mm-hmm.
So why now? What's the impact this month?
So I think we've already seen across some of our own accounts, there's basically been a change with the data that can be shared between GA4 and Google Ads. So for anyone operating within the UK and within European Economic Area, what we're seeing is a change in the amount of data that's being shared. So just one example, and anyone listening, anyone watching can have a look. If you look at your Google Ads audiences, you'll probably see a bit of a dip on March the 6th. You'll see, it's now looking at, okay, has this user, as well as providing analytics consent, have they also provided the additional consent required to share data between GA4 and Google Ads? We're actually seeing a slight dip just because it's now actually paying attention to those signals. Whereas, previously consent mode was probably more about the kind of data modeling, which I know we'll talk about in a minute.
Yeah,
it's that kind of change really.
So it's kind of the reasons to comply now are partly so you can maximize the audiences that you can target, but also partly, I guess, that you just don't want the risk of Google actually closing your ad account down for non-compliance. I mean, I know Google, have started to have some quite big European lawsuits and so on. So I think they take stuff seriously.
Yeah, and I think in the last few months, there's been a lot of kind of alerts and warnings within GA4 and within Google Ads saying, okay, kind of make sure that you're sending these consent signals, and so it'll be very clear whether or not you're sending those.
Okay. There are kind of two flavors of consent mode, basic and advanced. Tell us a bit about the difference there.
So basic, I often think of that as fairly classical kind of consent, really. So if a user chooses not to provide analytics consent, for instance, then we wouldn't let that GA4 hit to the server. Likewise, with Google Ads, if somebody doesn't provide marketing consent, I guess the slight update and the V2 bit of that is, let's take the scenario where somebody's said, okay, I'm happy to be for analytics tracking, but I'm not happy for marketing. Then when we send that hit to GA4, we also just need to make sure that the kind of consent parameter has the right value so that we can't share. So kind of basic that's kind of how that looks. And I guess advanced is really, it's those scenarios where a user says, okay, I don't want to provide consent for analytics, but under this framework, there's now, we can send that hit to GA4, but it's essentially a cookieless kind of ping to those servers. And that's kind of where data modeling then comes into play within GA4.
So we'll come on to data modeling. One moment. Let me just share my screen just to elaborate a little bit on that point of the different modes. So first of all, key point you made. So actually back up a little bit. So Littledata supports Google Consent Mode V2 for Shopify. These are docs about it if you want to read more about how it works. It happens out of the box automatically. You don't need to do anything special. We just integrate with Shopify's custom privacy API that we'll come on to. Now, Google has these sort of 4 different types of consent it considers here: ad storage, ad user data, ad personalization, analytics storage. Now, Shopify unfortunately really thinks about the world in terms of analytics consent or marketing consent. So you'll see here that when we do the mapping, if they've gone into analytics, then yes, you can store their analytics profile and use that in your data. If they've selected marketing, then we assume they've selected consented to ad storage as well as ad personalization. I mean, there's no such choices on Shopify to choose more granular details. And then in terms of kind of basic and advanced mode, this is a sort of table from Google's own docs about explaining the difference. So with basic mode, the tag just doesn't load if they don't consent. With advanced mode, it loads, but the settings set denied. And what that means is, for the basic mode, there's no data sent ping to Google service. For advanced mode, there is, but importantly, it's what they call a cookieless ping, as in there's no pseudo-anonymous data that's sent to Google. Now, I think what we were talking about, Tom, is there's an element of you'd be hearing some of your clients, they'd rather just not send a ping at all because they maybe just don't trust Google not to accidentally collect data in advanced mode.
Yeah, I think it's one of those slightly more grey, ambiguous areas of GDPR law, really, and it, generally what we say to our clients is kind of what's your appetite for risk here, and internally, how kind of compliant are you looking to be? And so, it's unclear. There's definitely no kind of obvious personal information that is sent, but there's enough there to perhaps do kind of fingerprinting and piece together user data. So
I mean, it comes back down. I mean, it's partly about jurisdiction and kind of, obviously those in Germany and Central Europe tend to get more worried about this sort of stuff. They have courts that are very tough on it. I think it comes down to whether you trust Google. I mean, I think that I personally think Google is a good actor, which means that even if they did inadvertently, there was a way of collecting the stuff, doesn't mean to say they are doing so. I think they are definitely trying to comply with all the relevant legislation with this consent mode. That said, we were chatting earlier about, there have been cases in Google's past where they have accidentally collect data. I think there was an incident with all these little cars going around collecting their street map view, and they had logged into people's Wi-Fi's for the right, not for nefarious reasons, just because it was a way of them saving bandwidth on their, rather than sending all the images on mobile data. But the problem is they end up collecting lots of actual personal data about people's Wi-Fi usage. So it's I think Google tries to do the right thing. If you want to be super safe, then, as you say, you probably just don't want to send them any data if the user hasn't consented. Okay, so let's go back to modeling. You were starting to talk about. So with advanced mode, the point of sending that cookieless ping is how does that potentially help Google Analytics?
So I guess in the kind of traditional model, you just wouldn't be sending any data into GA4. Have visibility on those events, those sessions, you just wouldn't see it. Whereas I guess, and this was kind of new to GA4 and to their original kind of consent mode framework, is that we now have a way of still collecting that data, which Google will then use to essentially kind of model that using their kind of machine learning. So you'll kind of get modeled conversions, and I think you kind of have an example diagram of this.
Yeah.
Sure. So ultimately, it's about trying to get better visibility of those users who kind of withheld that consent.
Yeah, so I think exactly. There's basically what this diagram shows us. There's if you assume that 50% of people consent, I mean, I think it's more likely more than that. But basically, you'll have of your 1,000 clicks, 500 of them you'll kind of know what happened. You'll actually able to observe whether they buy or not, and then half of them you won't know, but you do know that they happened because you ping the server, say this user did get to our site, and so what they can do is effectively model the conversion rate. Now, there's quite a few caveats to this. If you go and have a look at Google's own docs on model data, it says that it's obviously, first of all, you've got to have advanced consent mode enabled. But importantly, your property's going to have at least 1,000 events per day that are not consenting, where analytics is denied, and that means, by my maths, that means your property's going to have probably more than 50,000 visitors a month for this to really have any, to be visible at all. And to be honest, I suspect it's going to have more than 100,000 for it to be of any real use. So I think it's limited to bigger Google Analytics properties. I also suspect that when it comes to going back to this diagram, one of the things that Littledata already does, obviously with our server-side tracking, is track orders from people who opted out of being tracked in the storefront. So even though we don't have the cookie data about that person, in the same way here we have a cookieless ping from Shopify that says this person ordered. So we're kind of already filling in the gaps without the need to this advanced mode. So I would say don't worry about it very much, but I'm super interested to hear from anyone in the audience that actually has got the model data in your Google Analytics account. And you'd know that because if you go and have a look at the actual Google Analytics property, you'd see this under the blended reporting identity. You'd see modeling, and it would tell you that here it says modeling is not available, unavailable from this property. If it tells you you've got model data in there, then it's possibly using it. But the good thing with this reporting identity is you can switch between them. So I could use observed only, and I mean, in this case, it doesn't really matter because though it's not being used for this property. But if you click between them and you see any meaningful results, it'd be interesting to hear that. As I said, it works in theory. I just don't know whether it works in practice.
Yeah, I'm aware that you should see a little, in the main reporting UI, where it often shows whether you've got thresholding or sampling. You'll also get a little flag to say that modeling has been applied to this report.
Yeah.
And
to be honest, the problem with all these sort of predictive models is that you may get to a point where it just feels less trustworthy than just having the incomplete data set. I mean, basically, better to have 100% accuracy on a smaller data set than to have this sort of model data layered in.
I think that's always been, it's difficult, isn't it? It's a bit of a black box. That's always been a bit of a question mark over the data-driven attribution modeling in GA4. You could argue similarly with data modeling. You don't really know what Google is doing. Kind of why is it presenting it?
I mean, there's another that I actually love this classic Google diagram. This one, but it's got sort of this big black box machine in the middle that very literally just says leveraging Google's AI. So it's doing something clever, but you've no idea what.
Yeah. And it's funny because I've seen a lot recently of kind of a bit critical of data-driven modeling, and the reality is that like Universal Analytics really only had kind of the last click session-based attribution, whereas I feel like there's a bit of a mix now, so it's definitely an improvement.
Yeah, but I mean, I think you showed when you last came on live stream, I think in the autumn, you showed us that actually in reality, most stores don't have more than one click to sort of model. So it's like, it's good in theory, but again, it's only really if you've got quite high volumes of traffic that those sort of those driven attributions can be useful. Anyway, getting back to consent mode. So let's talk a bit about consent management platform, CMPs. I guess first of all, kind of what is a CMP, and if you're a brand on Shopify, do you need one?
So CMP, consent management platform, really this is going to be the tool that is used to gather consent from users. So this will be your privacy banner that pops up on the site. And again, there's just been a lot of confusion about, so there's some CMPs that very obviously support consent mode. So typically your CMP will provide those consent signals, which in a traditional world, tag manager or G tag, the behavior of those tags will differ depending on those signals. Now I know Littledata is slightly different. So yeah, for Shopify customers, bundled with their Shopify fee is its own privacy solution, which is quite basic. There's a lot of other tools out there. So if you're using anyone using Shopify's own GA4 connector or Google Tag Manager, you'd actually need to do a bit of manual work to get consent mode working with their own privacy solution.
Yeah.
Or using one of those other tools.
But importantly, as you mentioned, Shopify does have their own sort of basically consent management platform built in. They call it the Shopify Customer Privacy API. And that's exactly what Littledata integrates with. So this is our guide about how that works. But as you say, there's a kind of standard. I mean, there are plenty of cookie banner apps for Shopify, but those are standard Shopify one. So with this dog Canine Supply, they've got this banner on the bottom of the screen. You can kind of say, you can opt in, say okay or no thanks, and whether you click okay or no thanks, providing your banner integrates with Shopify Customer Privacy API, that basically gets passed on to us. So there's no need to implement a consent management platform beyond the cookie banner app they already have. You just need to make sure that it's compatible. Now, some of the popular ones that are compatible is Pandectes and also GDPR Backpack app. There are lots of others. What is a bit confusing is that Pandectes particularly is also bundled in Google consent mode into their product. I understand why they do that, but it's also kind of unnecessary. Like if you're using Shopify and Littledata, we already handle that. So you might use Pandectes for the cookie banner part of it and the consent management part of it, but you don't need to use it for the actual Google consent mode part of it. That's what we do.
And that's because Littledata is setting those consent states based on the Shopify.
Exactly. So we're based on if I just go back to this guide I was looking at earlier, which is about consent mode v2. So basically, every time this Shopify consent changes, the user opts into analytics or marketing or opts out of either, we automatically pass it on to Google and the Google tag. So that's just out the box. No need to worry about it. And we actually do have a help guide for Pandectes where we recommend basically switching off their consent mode integration because it basically clashes. So that's all working. And yeah, so Customer Privacy API, as I said, is Shopify's solution. Now, the only other scenario which we come across with brands is you may use a popular kind of non-Shopify CMP. The biggies are people like OneTrust, TrustArc. Actually, what I've built for those is a kind of what do we call it? Integration script. So just a very simple thing that basically relays their signal onto Shopify. So, for example, OneTrust basically loads up their sort of cookie consent widget modal in the middle of the screen where you choose whether to opt in or out of cookies. And then when you make switch settings there, the script we have just passed that on to Shopify. So basically, we're solving the integration of those not by integrating them directly, but by making sure that they integrate with Shopify, which all works out the box as well. Good. I think that was pretty much all I wanted to cover. I guess how does it? I could go back to kind of what's the impact on the customer. I mean, what should brands be worried about implementing this? I mean, is there a downside?
Should they be worried from a GDPR compliance?
No, I think actually also from a kind of data reporting kind of perspective.
Yeah. So I think from a kind of GDPR perspective, it's not a big deal. This is a kind of a Google specific requirement. But I think for anyone using GA4 and Google Ads, this is quite an important thing. I think it's tricky because it's almost too early to tell what the impact will be. This has only been around for 2.5 weeks, but I suspect if you don't address it, you'll start to see kind of worse performance within your Google Ads account. So campaigns will start to perform worse. I think essentially it's that shared link between GA4 and Google Ads that's going to start to break down if you're not sending these signals. So yeah, within Europe and the UK, this is quite an important thing to get on top of.
And in fact, while we're on the subject of Google Ads, but I might just a little product roadmap spoiler that Littledata is now looking to support sort of enhanced conversions in Google Ads directly. This is something Google recently made available. It's been sort of restricted beta for a while, but what this is about is basically being a bit like, in fact, very like what you can do in Meta ads and TikTok via Littledata, but it's actually identifying users based not on the cookie, but based actually on their customer profile, based on their email address, physical address, phone number, etc. And obviously, Google's been more cautious about this than Facebook because they just have less of that history of getting. Actually, no, Facebook's also got sued for data privacy, but you know what I mean. They just have less vocabulary attitude to customer data. But it is now available. And I think what that will mean over time is that as the effectiveness of cookie-based retargeting goes down, which I think is inevitable over time, this is sort of they're going to come in there to replace some of that. So you can already, I've already trialed. We've already got a public beta going for their version of this for Google Analytics, but we'll be supporting it direct for Google Ads in the coming months. So I think it's part of the toolkit you need as an advertiser just to make sure that those Google Ads audiences are as good as they could possibly be.
Mm-hmm.
Good. Thank you very much. I think that's all we have time for today, but I look forward to connecting again. And for all of you out there, I hope you have a seamless transition to Google Consent Mode V2.
Great. Thanks, Ed.